So following the webinar today, I have 6 questions outstanding, which I will provide a response to. So the first one is this: does empowerment have several levels? And by levels, if you're meaning, does it have several stages, or are there different levels of people there? I think the answer is yes to both. First of all, it is appropriate at all levels within the organization. Your middle management can step up or step out, as well as individual contributors, but also it has different stages and it depends on where people are. Remember, there is a will element, an attitude element to this too. Not everybody will want to be empowered or take more ownership. Some people are very happy with what they're doing in whatever role that they are. But even with those people, it's just making their job easier by giving them some ownership around a task or a decision that they might be able to make. But then as people progress through this, and particularly as I put in the book, certainly, for example, a 90-day plan that I have there, it also comes with associated learning and development. So as you can start to see people taking ownership for these at whatever their level is and at whatever stage they're at the moment, then you can see them developing and they have new ideas, bolder ideas. There are opportunities to take them up to another stage of this. And that might be as simple as, rather than just stepping out in their role and making some decisions, problem solving, working with their team, to actually go beyond their team and their job description and contribute to the broader business, maybe in a cross-functional team, for example, or project, or sitting in on a senior management meeting, those kind of things. So absolutely, there can be different stages, and those different stages can be for different levels. It depends on the attitude of the people there. It depends on their competence and what they prove as they do that. Remember, what they also have to do when they're being empowered, they have to still control their day job. They have to deliver on their KPIs and their objectives. But if they can do both, you start to see development. And that starts to inform the discussions in HR with line management about where they go from here. And that can be broader within their roles. It can be up the line. It can be cross-functionally. There's so many more options. So I hope that's helped. Second one from May: as a leader, how can we encourage or empower our people? Well, that's a really good question. And it goes to a lot of what I said during the presentation itself and some of the questions, is that there are 2 key components. And in order to get the conditions right so that empowerment can thrive, then the leadership mindset and the mindset of the organization has to shift. And once that's shifted into, we want to become a more empowering organization, we want an empowered workforce, that starts to challenge the traditional structures that we might have in place, the levels that we might have in place. We might need a flatter structure, but also it means that we as a leadership team and line management team need to, in some ways, be repurposed. And we might also need help in upskilling to support the organization as it evolves and the culture of the organization as it evolves into a more empowered one, but also supporting those individual contributors who are stepping up. So creating those skills which are more human-centered, as I talked about, is a really strong leap forward in this area. We need to support and empathize with those people who are saying, yep, you know what, I think I can do more or do better, or I can be more efficient in the role that I'm in, but I need a little bit of help with it. So communication is absolutely key. Empathy and emotional intelligence is absolutely key. Direction is key, because you also want to make sure that the individuals are clear about what they need to do within their job role itself, but also clear about the idea or this piece that they might be involved with where they're empowered. So keeping them on track that way. And for line managers, that means potentially moving away from supervision, performance management, into more of a growth mindset. So how do I repurpose myself as a coach and start asking more questions, listening more, catching more people doing it right, thinking about what recognition and reward looks like for those who are being empowered and succeeding in that, because it's different. So it may be completely outside our remuneration and recognition structure at the moment, but we do need to think of managers, how do we do that once we have caught people doing it right? What does that actually mean? What do we say? What do we do? What are the rewards for people? Third question, how can you be empowering without sounding overbearing with them? That's from Geraldine Pancho. Yeah, that's it. That's a good one, because this actually, I did interview a few people in some organizations who were trying to be more empowering, but this actually to me just indicates the issue of being still having our old mentality as a leader, or let's say a manager, and not evolving ourselves, but trying to be empowering at the same time and failing. And then we start to be overbearing because we can see that they're going to make a mistake here, or that's not going to quite work. And we feel the need to step in, but this is all part of being empowering. So to enable yourself as a leader to develop, because we're creating new habits, new skills and behaviors, then it's actually resisting stepping in when you're seeing things that might go wrong or could be done differently. It's letting those individuals own it and take ownership. And that is a very difficult thing to do for some leaders and managers who've been used to being more operational recently, let's face it, where we've been dealing with the pandemic, business survival, a global financial crisis of 10 years, etc., etc., etc. So, you know, the whole point here is that yes, we want to provide direction, and as Steen put it in the example for Four Fingers Crispy Chicken, he said I did make it clear that I didn't want to be disappointed. So it's setting out the ground rules and supporting that. So without being overbearing and you're kind of resisting moving forward in that area, actually just taking on a coaching mentality is key. Is, you know, questions are your tools of your trade. Is like, go in there, start asking the questions, start listening to what's happening, support the process, volunteer contribution if they want, and accompany them closer on that as well. And that may help you stop being so overbearing, I suspect. Here's a good question. Why does a CEO need to delegate? Well, that goes really for me in the first slide that I showed, is that the sheer perfect storm of forces hitting our organizations and businesses at the moment mean that you just need a more collective approach to deal with this. You need to go beyond an executive team that might not have had experience in dealing with digital, in evolving the corporate culture, in understanding what the hybrid workplace means, in understanding that the blended workforce means that 50% of your human capital will be independent workers within the next 2 to 3 years. How does that challenge our structures? And how do we then become more equitable, diverse, and inclusive? So all of these are swirling around. And of course, we've had the pandemic within that too. And it's acted as an accelerator. So as well as all of those things, we have a much more uncertain business base. Some organizations are still dealing with, how do we survive over the next 6 months? It's that extreme. Some are thinking, how do we reinvent ourselves and go to market differently? So you need to have more people involved in that discussion, because they're the ones executing it. And as I talked about, you know, strategy execution fails 63% of the time, and digital strategy execution fails about 84% of the time. So we need more people involved in the execution of this, and we need to trust people that they have the capability. Remember, a lot more of our employees have the new skill capability, almost at the same par as our leaders these days, when you consider digital skills, remote collaboration, virtual presenting, all of these kind of things that we need to do. So the need to delegate means that, you know, if you can have a more collective approach to all of that, me as a CEO, I can actually step out of the operational side of the business again, because mainly a lot of the CEOs that I'm seeing are absolutely in the operational side. I can step out, put my eyes to the sky again, and start thinking about how we navigate the future. What does the direction for the organization look like in the next 3 years? And how do we deploy our strategy more successfully there, so that we implement successfully and excellently, and that everybody comes along for the journey? So lots of reasons why an age of empowerment is important, not just for individuals in your organization, but the leadership itself. The last two questions. So here's the penultimate question. How can an employee lead up if that idea of empowerment is not a culture in the organization? And how should employee respond to this? Well, we had a similar question that actually came out in the Q&A after I did the presentation. And if it isn't there, if it isn't sponsored at organizational level, if just the words are spoken, it simply will not work. We've had 120 years of talking about this, remember, and barely 16% of organizations are actually doing it well in the world. Those that are doing it well are succeeding, but it's not a common practice. The words are common, but the practice is not, for sure. So if it's not as part of the DNA of the organization, as Johanna talked about when she was talking about Spotify, then you're going to have to rebuild that culture. And that's why that's one of the 5 forces. The organizational culture needs to shift not just to the digital era, but actually to the new ways of working, hybrid working, for example, a more blended workforce, as we've talked about, and how you bring and empower employees who are independent workers as much as you might do with permanent workers. So if it isn't even in the DNA of the company, how on earth are you going to do that? It just won't work. The danger is if you start using the words and say, no, you can take ownership and empowerment, but then it doesn't quite work. Your employees the employee goodwill will just evaporate. They'll get frustrated. Lots of different little politics will emerge as well, because some managers will really sponsor this, others won't, because they won't get behind it. And then there'll be a them and us, there'll be cliques that emerge, and you don't want that. And one of the big issues for many organizations at the moment are employees are voting with their feet. They're voting to join a company because of how they've dealt with the pandemic, how human-centered and community-centered they've become, how empowering they are. Lots of these things are happening right now. But equally, employees who are in the business and experiencing this, that it's not quite working, they'll vote with their feet. They will look out there, and it won't be necessarily a big organization. It could be a startup. It could be a small organization that's looking to do more, but unleash the power of the people that are in the organization. In fact, it's the small, and to some extent medium businesses who are much better at empowering because they have to. It's like the pandemic. They've been forced into it because they simply can't do everything themselves. So they're trusting their people to step up. And that's where large businesses can learn a lot from. Final question, and this is quite a long explanation. Let me read this out. With an organization that is subdivided in different groups, do we go on a push forward to the organization's goals, or do we wait for each and everyone to pull up to our level so everybody gets involved? Do we let their apathy-ness just slide, or drive more so that we can have the same goals? Same goals have a timeline, by the way. Yes, got it. I absolutely got it. Well, it's a similar response to what I just gave there. If you've got parts of the business doing this and parts not doing it, then people will look in there and say, I want a bit of this. I want to do more what they're doing. And then the other side who are being empowered say, well, why aren't they doing this? This is the best way to work. And is it us now? Are you actually now going to give us more to do rather than empower us in a more positive way? So it could go both ways with both sets of audiences. So it's far better to have a set approach. So either it's an organizational approach, or if you're subdivided into different groups, then the group itself or the isolated function can absolutely create this sense of empowerment, and it can be a model for the rest of the organization because it can be isolated and observed. And that's how I would suggest doing it, is to have the leadership support behind it. And that's the critical piece, whether it is across different groups or whether it's a collective. The leadership needs to be on board with it. They need to take lessons from it, and they need to observe how it's working. So in some cases, you won't need to wait for everybody to catch up. The problem will come if you're in a matrixed organization and you have cross-functional projects. Then you do need everybody on the same page. But you can, though, create a project whereby you say, we are creating this project, and whoever's on this project is going to be empowered like they've never been empowered before. They're going to take ownership. We're going to sponsor them and support them, whether you're doing that in your department or function at the moment, but you're doing it within this project. And that can certainly work because, again, it becomes a protected environment where people are, and particularly if you've got the right leaders and managers as stakeholders within that, and coaches to come in to support the people. And that's the repurposed focus of these project teams or functions or subdivided groups. If they've got more enlightened leaders, then they can be successful. If they're not, then you actually just might find that the apathy is more at leadership level, executive leadership level, and that trickles down the organization. So if you try to push it, it just won't go anywhere, or it'll just fizzle out, and that will potentially do more harm than good. Anyway, I hope that concludes the tour of our questions. I hope that's been helpful for you. You will have a copy of the slides that I delivered. I believe also the team at Power Renew will provide the links to get in touch with me, or you can, of course, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd be delighted to continue the conversation. Thank you.